is reality or something?
No, I'm not panentheist. I
So
hold to
wait,
God as
how can you
you
how
got
can you
it?
say God is everything, which is the case, but not say He's not the world or reality?
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
peculiar.
yeah, so God has aseity, which means he's singular and self-contained, and all the derivative state particulars are all grounded in him. Right, so that would like solve the one and the many. Uh, so all of these particulars are grounded in God, and so
Well,
he is
so
concretely
it's
unifying.
Or a
what's striking me
pantheist
as
or a
peculiar.
presup?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It sounds like pantheism, then not pantheism. I just don't understand how, like, how can everything which is the case be grounded in God without having like God be containing the world or whatever, like in a pantheistic sense.
Yeah, well, the part that didn't make any sense. The reason I asked the question was he went from talking about like reality having a property set. When I asked what he meant by reality having a property set, the he switched to talking about God's property set, right? Like that he's all truth revealing and those sorts of things. It's like, well, wait, is God reality? Because like I don't know how that had anything to do with reality having a property set. Like,
Also, where does that
or
entail
the
a mind or like an action or an agent? I mean, something can
actually,
have a
I'm
property
curious.
without
Do you
being an
reject
agent.
like some? Do you reject divine simplicity? Do you think like divine simplicity is false?
Like that
I'm
God
sorry.
is parts, like divine simplicity is God is parts,
Uh,
or
divine simplicity is just that like God's attributes are identical to his essence. Like there's not this distinction between um there's not God doesn't have predicates in the same way that other things have predicates, right? So God wouldn't have a property set like that. It wouldn't be the same kind of property set because it would just be something about an identical relationship. So like for instance, omniscience is identical to omnipotence. Those two things are just identical because God is divinely simple. He can't have more than one property. He's just one thing.
yeah,
So like
I don't think
if
that
you're arguing
like
for
like
like
omniscience is not omnipotence. Like they're not the same thing, right?
okay, so then you
They're
reject
different.
divine simplicity. Okay, that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so that would be a rejection of divine simplicity because like the weird part was I was like, but property sets are like going to be like something like predicative, but if something's predicative, like that just means that it's not simplistic, right? So God can't have predicates. He has attributes, but those attributes are identical to his essence. So it's not the case that they're predicated to him. It's what he is.
Um. Okay, kind of an idea. If wait, so he rejects the idea that like God is a big whole without like that can't be reduced or simplified. Simplified.
Yeah, he's gonna reject divine simplicity. So like God, from his view,
Okay.
can have predicates. So
Okay.
there's actually predications like things that are um, predicated to God. Now the reason that this is weird. This is why like theism in the classical sense. The reason that it didn't think that God could have these kind of predicates is because those predicates are then going to be like contingent things, right? They could have been otherwise. Um, like for instance, and it's also going to have a dependence relationship. So like if I have predicates like for instance being a human, I'm going to be contingent on humanness, right? If humanness is like a real thing, if you take like a realist view, so I'm going to be contingent on the predicates that are applied to me. Otherwise, I'm just not. So they're going to be componential, which means I'm also going to have parts, and that's why they rejected this and went with
Yeah.
divine simplicity. It's because it comes with some pretty big issues. Because then God is not like this ultimate grounding relationship, right? Then he's going to be like he's going to be contingent on something else.
All right. So yeah. So my question. So I asked you if there's an actual state of affairs, right? You said yes. So I asked you, okay, well, what is that the property set of the actual state of affairs? So what is your view on that?
So I'm what's called a transcendental idealist. So we take kind of an agnostic position on on a number of different topics. There's some topics that I do have a view on. Like, for instance, I think that some kind of substance monism is going to be true. So it's not going to be the case that there's going to be like a dualistic system because there are going to be issues of like, as an example, the interaction problems from dualistic positions. It can't be the case that there's pluralism because pluralism would have just even more interaction problems because if those things are fundamentally discontinuous with each other, um, then they wouldn't have anything in common in order to interact with each other. So so are you committed to something like Platonic realism? Like, do you think that there is actually this realm of forms, and maybe it's in the mind of God or something like that, and that's explaining like our ability to predicate things? Is that what you're getting at when you're talking about like whether or not the world actually has those predicates?
I mean, I think it sounds like it makes sense. So I'll kind of explain my view, and you can tell me if it lines up with that or not.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah, I think there's like like a perfect like a perfect apple, like a perfect rectangle, like these perfect like forms, as you
Hmm.
say, and that they are grounded in God. Um, that
Yeah, that's
that
Plato. That's
like
Plato
God,
then.
yeah, like God
Yeah. So
makes it
the
actual, right?
so
So
the
then,
the
and then also, I guess with regards to your critique, about the rectangles, like I would view it as God as a deity, which means that he's singular and self-contained. So he would be, the being that is a one, that is unifying all of these particulars. He would be unifying the like perfect rectangle with all of the imperfect rectangles.
That's very similar to yeah. That's essentially Plato's. So what Plato said was like the good, which is probably what you're going to call God, was the thing uniting all of them. So the problem is that you never get to God, right? Because if there's an infinite regress, and those like if you take the first thing that leads you to believe in the realm of forms, that first thing is going to be something like we need an explanation of how there are these bits of reality that are somehow having a quality in common. What's the quality in common? Oh, the form. So, but the problem is if you need something uniting these two things, then you're going to need a third thing uniting those two things again, and then again, and then again, and again, and it goes into an infinite regress. So you never actually get to God explaining them in any meaningful sense because God's it's going to be an infinite change, so it can't be that God is at the end of it. That's the objection. Now, if you just arbitrarily, stick God in there, like if you're saying, "Oh, well, here's God, He's gonna explain that," like, well, okay, well, you didn't really explain anything then, right? You never got to the explanation part because it has to cut off somewhere for it to be explanatory. But the premise leading you, the premise that leads you to believe in the theory of the forms, is going to commit you to an infinite regress, which means God can't do that because it's going to be infinite because there's no end.
Okay. Well, all right. So I guess I have a question and such.
Hmm.
All right. So so basically, yeah. So I asked you if there's an actual state of affairs, right? You said yes, and then say, okay, what is the property set? So you said like substance monism, uh, and then I asked you, do you know this is the case? Like, um, like, do you know that this is the property set of the actual state of affairs? And so from that, I believe like there wasn't a certainty on that. Um, so all right.
Did you have a question? But I didn't hear a question in there.
Yeah. I'm just thinking.
Okay.
So there is a so if you don't have access, right? If you or I don't have access to the actual state of affairs, um, why would it matter what what system we posit? Right? You go and you put forth a system, substance monism, or I could put forth some other system. But if we don't have access to what is the case, why would any system being put forth matter?
So, one, you're going to have certain types of access, right? So, like as an example, my beliefs are presumably going to be something that is an actual state of affair, right? I actually do have beliefs. If those are actuality things, then I have access to something that's actual. What I don't have access is the things that are transcendentally exterior to me. So, like, for instance, I have space exterior to me because spatiality is not transcendentally apart from an aspect of our perception from my. Um, but any putting forward like a theory or something, like, sure I could be wrong about monism. Like it could be the case that I'm just wrong about what it means to have an interaction. And that's what's accounting for the reason that like my objection about interaction between a dualistic system. That's explaining why I'm wrong there. That I'm just wrong about what it means to interact. I don't think I'm wrong. I think I'm pretty. I'm pretty confident that there can only be one thing, and I think that. But you're also going to need like you're going to need an account for how do you overcome this objection if you're going to be a dualist. And presumably, if you're a Christian, you think you have like some sort of you do you think that you have like real access to the actual state of affairs of reality? Like, are you a direct realist?
Yeah, like I believe that I have access to the actual state of affairs. That God, well, that reveals to me that the apple on the table is actual. Um, but that so there is something tied into our senses, or perhaps other than our senses, that lets us know, okay, that's a real, actual apple. Uh, so that's kind of what I would hold to. God's revelation is what grounds our epistemology, or
Yeah,
lets
but
us
I don't
interact.
see why you would need that. Like, you could be a direct realist and say, like, there's not a need for like a revelational relationship between the apple and me, right? Like, it could just be something about my senses. My question is, what's the role of revelation in that? What is it doing? Like,
It's it's
presumably, if
it's
you're
letting you.
positing an entity, revelation is going to have some sort of explanatory value. So what is it explaining that our senses couldn't?
It's explaining that we have some connection with the actual state of affairs, uh, and with senses alone, we could be fooled by everything, right? It's like, okay, that could be. Let's say like you and I are driving down the street, and then you see someone crossing the street, and you decide to hit the gas, and you send them flying. So there's kind of like there's two things that you and I can't tell God. Right? The first thing is you can't say to God, "Hey God, I didn't know that was a real person. Right? I thought it was a Matrix person. I thought I was in the Matrix, and you and I were a brain in the vat. Um, and why didn't you tell me, God? Why didn't you go right in the stars? That's a real person." And then you and I would have understood. Oh, okay, that's a real person. Uh, God
I mean, there's
has
a
revealed to you and revealed to me that's a real person through
there's a,
His
there's a pretty
omnipotence
obvious glaring flaw here.
of
I just want to point out really quickly before we
attestation.
get too far. Sorry, I wasn't trying to interrupt. I just think that I think there's a pretty obvious flaw. Like, if it's the case that you can know the apple's real in virtue of God's revelation, um, and yet you can.
External actual phenomena is through flawed sensory apparatus. Right? So, like let's say you and I were to look at the mirage, or, the water on the road. Um, we might believe, like, oh, I think there's water on the road, uh, but but that's based on our perception of a physical phenomena. Heat rising off of the road. So we are seeing something. We are seeing these heat waves, but we're just miscategorizing them, or not really accepting them for what it actually is.
Well,
But
this strikes me as a little bit
it's
of.
not the
Oh,
case.
sorry.
Sure, but it's not the
I thought you
case
were done.
that. Sure, yeah, but yeah, go ahead.
As I was gonna say, this strikes me as a little bit of like shifting the goalpost. So before you said the way in which you know that the apple is real and that it's actually on the table is God's revealing it to you. So you gave an actual example, and I gave a rebuttal to that. So rather than saying, "Hey, you're right," it's not the case that God is revealing the apple to me. Instead, God is just revealing that that there is an external world. But that's not going to take any explanatory value to what you're talking about, right? Like it could be the case that like my senses are actually doing so. Like I think there's an external world in virtue of my senses that I'm actually having these experiences, right? That's going to give me reasoning for me to think. I don't see how revelation is going to be any different. Like, what is it that revelation is doing that's different than your senses that allows you to know there's an external world? Like, what's it actually doing?
Uh, it's the actual state of affairs reaching out and grounding you in the actual state of affairs. It's going beyond the seeming, whereas the senses can never get beyond the seeming. Right? It's always stuck there. So here's I guess here are some of my questions and stuff. But so you say you have so why does it matter? Like why does it matter if you say substance monism if you cannot say that this is what is the case, right? Like do you have something that makes it that you would know beyond a shadow of a doubt, like have certainty? Like do you have access to the actual state of affairs and its property set to say
Yeah,
that
I don't
substance
even think that's
monism?
yeah, I don't even think that that's going to be important to whether or not we know something, right? Like I don't think there's like going to be any kind of like a relationship between certitude and like knowledge. I don't know why there would ever be a relationship. But I don't think my question really got answered, and I want to kind of ask it again in a way that.
I think
So
it is important.
what I'm asking, what is it?
Oh, I was saying I think it is important. Like certainty is important when it comes to knowledge. Like
Oh, well, then
I
you're
would
going to
say
commit
knowledge.
yourself to you're going to end up committing yourself to epistemic nihilism if you go that direction. We'll go down that path in a second. But first, I want to walk through I want to walk through my question because I don't think that I mean I think you were intending to answer it. I don't think you were like dodging it or anything. But I don't think that maybe you didn't understand the question that well. So the question is this. So let's say, for instance, I ask someone, why do you believe there's an external world? And they say something like, I believe there's an external world in virtue of the fact that I have my senses. My senses seem to be perceiving something, and that thing is not going to be like relational to just my mind. I think that there is this other thing that needs to furnish my mental content. So those are going to be explanations as to what your senses are doing. Your senses are furnishing mental content. That's going to be the explanation. So what I'm asking is, what is revelation doing that's distinct and unique from your senses that tells you that there's an external world? Like, what is the method by which revelation is giving you that information?
Well, we're contrasting like the Christian worldview, with the non-God worldview. So in the Christian worldview, your understanding of reality is like tied together with your senses. It's kind of integral. It's all part, like it's all together, part and parcel. It's not the case that we could take our eyes and be able to perceive the outside world and just toss out God's revelation and be like, oh well, God didn't reveal to me that's a real dog and that's a real person. It's not the case we could just toss it out. It's the case that it's all together. Like a part of your senses is the understanding that like there are other conscious minds right outside of yourself. Like okay, this is another conscious mind. That's another conscious mind. Although that's not directly perceived. Right? That's God like just writing His law in your heart. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. But yeah, with one's senses, God allows you to perceive that there are certain things that are real and certain things that are not, and it's all together, right? You can't just separate it.
So maybe I can ask
that's
the
kind of
question in
my
a little bit of a different way. Is revelation internal or external to you?
well, I would say that it's God revealing things to you,
Yeah. So is it
so
if
that you don't
revelation
get
is coming from
that.
God and God is not and God is external to you, then it's the case that revelation is going to be external to you. So the question is how is it you have access to this external world, right? That's the question to the atheist. But then you're just going to end up begging the question, right? You're going to say, "Oh, well, I have access to revelationally to this, right?" But if revelation is external to you, then you're going to need some other method by which to have access, right? Like it can't be the case that you're going to have access to because you're just saying, "Oh, well, I have access to the external world again." Now, if it's the case that revelation is internal to your view, like say for instance, it's like happening inside of you, then how is it giving you how is it giving you access to the external world in a unique way that's not going to be like something similar to your senses? Like it doesn't. It seems like you're positing this entity, this revelation, but it's not doing anything in your epistemology. It's not. It's not actually. There's no method. There's no. It's not performing anything. You're not giving. It's not giving. There's nothing explanatory about it. Like if I give you the explanation as to why I would believe there's an external world, there's gonna be like in virtue of something else, right? But if you just say, well, God reveals it, well, I mean that doesn't really tell me anything. Like what's he doing? Um, I don't see. I just don't. I don't understand what it's doing. And two, like where is it and how do you have access to it?
Well, okay, so what it's doing is that it's revealing to you that the external world is actual, rather than the case that we would not know, right? So let's say you and I reject that God is self-attesting, um, and revelatory. It reveals to you that that's a real dog, that's a real person, that we reject that. Well, in that case, you and I couldn't know anything to be true. Right? It could be that we're in the Matrix. That's a Matrix dog. That's a Matrix person. And if you or I were to grab a bat and walk outside and start cracking people outside the head, that'd be perfectly fine, because we have no actual certainty. It's like, well, it could be the case that we're in the Matrix, or it could be the case that we're within a dream within a dream within a dream. It's just anything could be possible.
Do you
Nothing could be known, right?
do you maybe not see that there's an issue when I ask what is revelation doing? You say it's revealing, and I say, well, how is it revealing? What's the method by which it's revealing? You say, oh, well, it's God revealing that there's actually a dog, and it's like, yeah, but what's it doing? Like if I said something like "It's doing," and someone said, well, I'm sensing things, and so because I'm sensing things about the external world, it must be the case there's an external world. And you go, yeah, but how are you knowing that your senses are having access to that external world? Like, how are you having that access? Well, via my senses. Like, it's obviously circular, and it's not even explanatory. Like, it's almost like you're not even attempting to explain how and what revelation is doing. Like, it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Like, if I'm going to
Mm,
posit an additional entity, like something like revelation or something like that, like in my epistemology, it should be doing something for me to really need it. But it's not really doing anything. You're just saying, oh, it's revealing. Well, what's it revealing? Revealing there's an external world. Okay, well, what's the method by which it's doing that? Because my question was one, if it's external to you, if revelation is coming externally, then how do you have access to it? What's the method by which you have access to revelation? If it's internal to you, then how are you having access to the external world at all? Right? Like it. I don't know. I don't even. It's not even making sense. Like how this is what this is even doing. You're just saying, oh, I have access to the external world. It sounds more like dogma. Like if somebody said, yeah, I have access to the external world. Well, how do you have access to the external world? I have access to the external world. That you didn't tell me anything. Like you're not telling me anything. So what is revelation? What's the method by which it's giving you information? How is it doing it? And how is that distinct from any other method, like say for instance your senses or anything?
well, by method, do you mean like mechanistic breakdown, or
Yeah, I'm looking for a mechanistic, like presumably if it's explanatory, you're gonna have some reasons, something it's actually doing that's giving you something. And if you don't have that, then it's not explanatory. You like, and if you're committed to like if you don't have an explanation for how you have access to the external world and your explanation is non-explanatory and then you're going to be committed to that you don't have access to the external world, right? Like from your own view, at least. Like someone else might not hold that, but from your view you're asking the atheists to explain how they have access to the external world. And then when it's flipped on you and they go, well, wait a second, how do you have access to it? and you say revelation, but that ends up being non-explanatory, then you haven't actually explained that you have access to the external world. And so if you're saying the atheist, if they can't explain that they have how they have access to the external world, then they have knowledge. Well, then it just follows again that you don't have knowledge.
Yeah. You if one doesn't explain how they have access to the external world and they don't have knowledge. Knowledge would be
Cool.
God revealing truth to you that you cannot be wrong about. Knowledge is certain; it is not probabilistic. But yeah. So you're
So wait,
asking
before we go too far, I want
the
to play on that a
methodology,
little bit.
right? Sure.
Yeah, let me play on that a little bit, and then I'll give you some time to talk because I know I've been talking a little bit too much. It's my bad, but um, essentially you are committed. Like if you can't explain how you have access to the external world, then you can't have knowledge. That is your position. So great. So the next thing I want to ask is, do you agree that circles are like in most cases, specifically this one, like I think it seemed like premise circularity. Do you agree that premise circularity is not mandatory?
Well, I would
Like if I
say
ask you,
that there.
how do you know you have a mom? Because I know I have a mom. Well, how do you know that you have a mom? Because I know I have a mom. Do you agree that that's not explanatory?
Yeah, I would agree that that is not explanatory, but I believe that there's vicious and virtuous circularity. And when it comes to that which is ultimate and the ground of all being, inevitably there is going to be circularity. Like with worldviews, at the very bottom layer, there's going to be circularity.
Well, so premise circularity is not going to be virtuous, right? That's not what virtuous circularity means. So the example I gave, how do I know that how do you know you have a mom? Because I know that I have a mom. So when I ask you, how does revelation reveal things to you? Like what is it doing that allows you to know something? What's the way? Well, it's revealing things. Okay, well how is it revealing things to you? Well, it's revealing to me that there is a dog out in the external world. Well, but what is it doing that is allowing you to know that? Right? Do you agree that that follows the exact same model as the how do you know you have a mom? Because I know I have a mom. How do you know you have a mom? Because I have a mom. Do you agree that that follows the exact same structure? That's a premise circular thing.
Well, I believe that there's a creator creation distinction. Right? So, yeah, there's something different when we're talking about that which is ultimate, fundamental, and primary, from which all things are derivative from and depend upon. That God he
Before
has
before you go that far, I asked a
self-existential.
yes or no question. I want to get a yes or no. Do you think that are you saying that you think the answer is no? That doesn't that when I ask how is it the case that revelation is giving you access to the external world? You say it's revealing things. I say, well, what's it doing? What's the method by which it's revealed? What is it doing? And you said something that that's going to take the same kind of circularity. It's the exact same sort of structure as the how do you know you have a mom? Because I have a mom. How do you know you have a mom though? Because I know I have a mom. Do you agree that the structures of those are the same? Just the structure.
Uh, sure, I would say like the structure is the same,
Okay.
but I would hold to that it's a category error, right? That we're having a mother is different from ascertaining uh, what is the ground of all being, like what is ontology,
Well,
right?
it
Like
can't be different
a
because we
mother,
were
a
talking
mother,
about epistemology, right? The way in
a
which you
mother.
know about the
Yeah,
external world, not whether or not there is an external
well,
world, but how do you know it?
well,
So we're talking about
yeah, yeah.
epistemology.
Well. From my view, either the ontology, either the actual state of affairs, uh, has a necessary property set to allow for you to have like to come to knowledge, right? To have epistemology, or the actual state of affairs does not have the necessary property set. It's not a healthy environment for knowledge, you know. So, for example, Descartes' demon, that's not a healthy environment, or the Matrix, or Brain in the Vat. Those things aren't healthy environments. So what I'm saying is that we do reside. The actual state of affairs is that we do reside in a healthy environment for you and for me to possess knowledge. Now, define knowledge as God revealing truth to you, to me that we cannot be wrong about. And if we reject the actual property set of the actual state of affairs, that results in us positing a alternate worldview from which we would fall into absurdity because we're denying one or more of God's
Do
properties.
you understand my objection when you said it was a category error? Why it can't be a category error? So
You,
first off, a
you said
category error is
you were
not.
talking about epistemology.
Yeah, so where I'm asking you how you know something, and you're talking about revelation, and I'm asking what revelation is doing that's allowing you to know something. So in the same instance, I'm also the reason the structures are identical and it can't be a category error. First off, I, you're just wrong about what a category error is. Like I think what you mean is that you wanted to say something like I was confusing epistemology with ontology, but that can't be the case because we're only talking about the way in which you know something. We weren't talking about like the way in which ontology, what things actually are. We're just talking about how you know things. I think that's more so what you're trying to say. But it's also the case that like the question about how do you know you have a mother is identical to how do you know about the external world, right? So we're just strictly talking about epistemology, the way in which you know something. So it can't be the case that we're that I'm confusing epistemology with ontology because we're only talking about just epistemology. I'm not even asking you anything about ontology. So I'm asking you within your epistemology, what is it that revelation is doing? And your answer was, well, it's revealing to the external world. Now, if it takes this
Okay,
circular pattern and you're committed to like circularity is
but I
fallacious because like it's non-explanatory, and you're also committed to the idea that if you can't know there's an external world, that is that you can't explain how you have access to it, then it's also the case that you don't have knowledge. So it just follows that you're an epistemic nihilist
so
from your own view
you
anyways.
said sure. So you said like the question of okay, how do you know you have a mother is identical to the question of okay, how do you know that there is an external world?
Hmm.
And I reject that. I reject that. I completely reject that.
Why?
Um, because you could because if we're just you could go and hold to oh like my mother exists, but it could be the case that the whole world is just a simulation. And so when you're talking about the existence of your mother, you're just talking about this artificial AI construct uh, that that happens to interact with you. That you have sensory, like you get sensory perception through your eyes. It feels like you can touch her and all this sort of stuff. So that doesn't go beyond the seeming, right? I want to focus on ontology, right? I care about the actual state of affairs, and that's my focus. My focus is always on the actual state of affairs. It's not just the seeming, right? Just to say, oh,
Strikes me as a
I have a sensation of my mother. All right, so I'll kind of explain how I'm trying to view things. So um, let's say like you're an observer, right? So you're a spear, right? You're a spear, or I'm a spear, but we'll just say with you, like you're a spear, you're the observer, and then around you there's a bigger spear, right? So this bigger spear is the actual state of affairs, and you're the smaller spear that's within this actual state of affairs. And so the question is that is there a bridge, right? Is there a bridge between the big spear and the small spear so that you know what the actual state of affairs is, or is there no bridge, right? So my contention is I'm saying that there is a bridge between the big spear and the small spear, the observer, you, and that is God's revelation. It's revealing truth to you that you can't be wrong about. But if you like burn the bridge and you say, oh, there is no bridge, there's no revelation, well, then you can't make any claims at all about the bigger spear, about the actual state of affairs. You can't claim that there is substance, monism. You can't claim anything. All axioms, base level axioms, are they're base level assumptions without external verification, right? They're all useless because they have no external verification. So without having access to the big sphere, one cannot account for knowledge, demonstration. The future will be like the past. They can't account for anything.
Yeah, I
And
understand
there's
that's your position. So I'm not mistaken on what you're saying that revelation is. What I'm saying what I'm trying to understand is what is revelation doing? If it's just giving you access, like that's not something unique from, like, say, for instance, sense perception or something like that. Someone could hold that sense perception is doing this. So what I'm asking is what is this the distinction between like revelation and so such that your senses can't accomplish that. I don't see why it could couldn't, because if it's the case that revelation is external to you, right? So I think you kind of missed the point about the way in which how do you know you have a mother and how do you know there's an external world is identical. The way in which it's identical is that it's just about your epistemology, the way in which you know something. So when we ask these questions about how do you know something, we're strictly talking about epistemology. Now you're wanting to shift things over to talking about ontology, and you're just going to be mistaken, because that's going to beg the question, right? So like we haven't gotten to where you're telling me how you have access. All you've said is you have revelation. Okay, what is it that revelation is doing? And you said, essentially, you said it's revealing things to you. Now, that's just premise circularity, right? So all you're saying, you just said the same thing again, right? You just said, I'm questioning. I don't think it's actually true, but at the same time, I'm still going to say, how is it the case that revelation is doing something? If all it's doing is revealing, and when I say what is it doing when it was revealing, well, it's just telling you there's an external world. You just went in a circle. The question is, how do you know there's an external world? So at the end of it, you're getting down to like there being an external world and it's revealing it to you, and it's like, well, but what's it doing? How is it doing that? And if it's non-explanatory from your view, if you can't explain how you have access to the external world, then it follows you don't have knowledge. That's your perspective. So if premise circularity is non-explanatory, then it follows just trivially that it's going to be the case that you don't knowledge from your own view, because you didn't explain anything. Like, it didn't seem to do anything.
Well, so I would say some of the revelation is that God reveals to you that there are other entities to whom that we are accountable to and responsible for. Like dogs or people. So God reveals that there are these other entities that are like within our care. But
Do you not see that you're just saying the same thing over and over again, and that's not explaining anything? Like, you're not telling me anything about what revelation is doing. You're just saying it's just revealing. Well, how is it revealing to you? Well, it's God telling you that there's something out there in the external world. And that's just not going to be explanatory. If you're not understanding the objection, I get that. But if you're understanding it and you're just ignoring it, then I'm going to get a little frustrated. So is it the case that you're understanding the objection because you're not really responding? You're just saying the same thing over and over again. Um, do you? Let's start with, like, because you mentioned virtuous circularity. Let's go back to that for a second, because maybe that'll help clear things up. So, what do you think virtuous circularity is? What do you think that means?
Well, I would say that would be uh, basically like with ontology, that it would be God revealing truth to you and truth to me that we can't be wrong about. It would be the ground of all being. Right? So it would have to do with that which is the base level within worldviews, and like something that is fundamental, primary, and ultimate. Right?
So if I say something like, the way in which I know that the external world exists is because I know the external world exists, and I say that that's something like, that's the grounding of my epistemology, so it's okay for it to be circular. Do you agree that that would fit the criteria for what you mean when you say virtuously circular?
All right. So the way that you know that the external world exists is that you know the external world exists.
Yeah. Do you agree that if I said something like, that's the we're getting to the fundamental nature of reality, it's that I know the external world exists, right? That's something fundamental to my view. Do you agree that that fits the criteria for what you mean when you say, like, a virtuous circle?
I'm just thinking. So then, you say, okay, like if you say the way I know the external world exists is that I know the external world exists, well, what would be the property set of the external world?
Oh, and that's not being informative, because it's not even. But we're not even. That's like off topic overall. Like, so for instance, what you're saying is you know the external world exists because it's being revealed to you. How do you know it's being revealed to you? It's being revealed to you. And the reason that you think that this is okay, that this circularity is okay, is because you think it's like the ground base of things, and so because it's the ground base of your epistemic system, that it's okay to be circular. Now, if somebody said, this is the ground base, the base level of my epistemology, is that the way in which I know the external world exists is that I know the external world exists. Let's say that's the circle they make. do you agree that that fits the criteria? It's identical to your system in that all you're saying is the same thing twice. It's at the base level of your epistemology. Are there any other distinctions that are required for virtuous circularity?
Sure. I'd say yeah. It's the same. Like there's no
Cool. So you think
other
that
criteria.
okay, cool. So if you agree that that kind of circularity is okay, then you're going to be committed to someone can just say they know the external world exists. Like it's just kind of like dogmatic. It's like I know the external world exists, and that's fine. They've achieved what you have said that they can't achieve in a really silly way.
Well, I would go and ask them, what is the external world? Like, what is the sphere that surrounds the observer? Describe it to me. Tell me its property set. Tell me all about it. Right.
Well, so for me, I don't actually I don't think either one of those views, yours or the one I just espoused, is going to make any damn sense, right? So like it's not going to be the case that circularity is going to be planetary, and no, it's not virtuous. So I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of what virtuous circularity actually fucking means. So think about there's like a couple of different types of circularity. You've got premise circularity. So the premise one is the same as like the conclusion. So begging the question, premise circularity. Then you have what's called concept circularity, which is the next one. Both of these are rejected, by the way, by virtually every philosopher out there that I've ever read, anyways. So the concept circularity is going to be something like how do we justify like the laws of logic or something, and then you give an argument, something like premise one, God exists. Premise two, if God exists, then we can know that the laws of logic exist. Conclusion, we can know the laws of logic exist. Something like that. That's how I'm going to justify my knowledge of the laws of logic. Problem is that you just used the thing in question that we're questioning whether or not you actually know it. The concept of the laws of logic are going to be intrinsic to the premises that you just outlined. So this is concept circularity, and this is usually projected as being a type of vicious circularity. What's called virtuous circularity is paradigmatic level circularity. So if you take every node of knowledge in someone's epistemology, everything they know, and you just kind of map it out, and then you sort of draw inference or inferential relationships between each individual node of knowledge, so that like it's almost in a format of this node of knowledge connects inferentially to this node of knowledge, and this node of knowledge connects inferentially to this node of knowledge, etc. And then you zoom out on that system, so you can sort of make like a chart of all the things that you know, and you zoom out. It's going to look like a giant web where they're all sort of interconnected, and that's the type of circularity that coherentists hold to, and they call it virtuous circularity because it's just that all epistemologies, from their view, are going to be circular in that way. So just adding in like that it's the base of your epistemology is not going to be sufficient for something to be circular and that be okay. Not from anyone else's view, because the problem is that it's not going to be explanatory. That's why circularity is objectionable. So if what you're committed to is that in order to have knowledge, you have to have an explanation as to how you have access to the external world, and it's the case that premise circularity is non-explanatory, and you're committed to the way in which you know about the external world is a premise circular argument, then it just follows that you don't have knowledge because you don't have an explanation as to how you have access to the external world. Do you understand that argument?
Hmm. Um, no, I don't. Can you
Okay.
run it by me again?
So I'll go again. Yeah. So if it's the case that premise circularity, the reason it's objectionable is that it's non-explanatory. From your view, you have to have an explanation as to how you have access to the external world in order for you to have knowledge. Um, but the explanation that you gave was a premise circular argument. It was just how do you have access to the external world? Revelation. How do you have access to revelation? Well, it's revealing it to me. It was it's just basic old premise circularity. So if premise circularity is objectionable because it's not explanatory, and you're requiring that you have an explanation as to how you have access to the external world in order to have knowledge, and so you've given an argument that's non-explanatory, then you haven't explained how you have access to the external world, and so it follows from your position that you don't have knowledge. Like you're an epistemic nihilist, whether you realize it or not.
Well, in my position, like I accepted the other individual. Right? You know, the other individual says, okay, well, I know that the external world is actual in virtue of that. I know the external world is actual. And I was like, okay, well, you know, I'd be willing to work with that. Now tell me like other things about like what you know. Like is the only thing that you know is that the external world is actual, or are you an internal being? Are you self-attesting? Like, what
I don't
is
know if
this
you I don't know if you
external?
understand why it's sufficient that it's the original point of the conversation is that you're committed that you cannot have any knowledge if you don't have like God, right? And if you're committed to that they can't have knowledge, if they just say, how do you have access to the external world? I have access to the external world, and this is like at the base of their epistemology, then you've already failed, right? You've already given at least I've given you at least one system that you're committed to saying they know something. That doesn't include God. Like that system didn't include God at all. So it's like you've already like you've already fallen on your own sword at that point. So I'm giving you sort of like a dichotomy here. Either it's the case that you're an epistemic nihilist because if you commit to the previous view that you had said that premise circularity is fallacious because it's non-explanatory, or you can go with this alternative view that was honestly silly and I don't think it actually would work. I would personally, but if you accept it, then you accept at least one other view that doesn't include God that allows for at least one piece of knowledge. So that's the two options I'm laying out for you. And I think it's exhaustive because
Maybe
you can go one of the two ways.
define some of the words you're using, Tart, because I don't. I mean, like
Um,
epistemic nihilism and stuff for him, like so he understands the argument a little more clearly.
oh, okay. So epistemic nihilism is just the position that you don't know anything, that we don't know anything, knowledge doesn't exist. It's
Yeah.
not a thing. If you're committed to if you're committed that you have to have access to the external world to have any kind of knowledge whatsoever, which was previous in the discussion, something that he was that he was talking about. If that's something that you are committed to, then and you have to have an explanation for that, which was what you posited that the atheist has to have. They have to have an explanation as to how they have access to the external world. Um, but the answer you gave was just plain old boring old premise circularity, and it's not. And premise circularity, the reason anyone finds circularity objectionable is just that it's not explanatory. It's not informative. You didn't really explain anything. And so, if you have given me an explanation that isn't explanatory, and from your view, it has to be the case that you have to be able to explain how you have access to the external world in order to have knowledge, and your explanation didn't do that, then it follows you don't have knowledge, at least from your own view, which is already peculiar to say overall because then you're going to know that you don't have knowledge, and obviously that's silly. But the alternative is that you can accept that premise circularity is okay, like you did with the example of how do you have access to the external world because I have access to the external world. That premise circularity is okay because it follows the same form and it's at the base of someone's epistemology, so it's a fundamental thing, right? From their view. I think that's silly, and I don't think it's informative, and I would completely reject it. But you said you wanted to accept it. So the problem is, though, that once you accept that, and you've already, and you're saying that once you have that, once that counts as knowledge, then you're committed to saying at least one other view in the world has knowledge, and that's going to be the negation of the proposition we started discussing at the beginning, which was that it's the case that you can't have any knowledge if God doesn't exist. Was your position? That's the defeater for that position.
Well, I guess another thing about the whole, like, let's say they say, okay, I have access to the external world because I have access to the external world. I guess I would reject that because what I would see is that the external world needs to be that which is revelate. It's revealing itself to them. Unless they're claiming that they are, they are the external world. They are the ground of all being. Right? They are that which is eternal or actual, or unless they are the external world. So we're talking about the external world to say, okay, I have access to the external world because I have access to the external world. Well, how do you know that you have access to the external world, or what is it that makes it so that you have access to the external world? Like, what is the external world? Like, I think what we need to start with is the external world, and then relate that to how that relates to the observer. Not start with the observer and then just say, okay, observer has access to the big spear because the observer says he has access to the big spear. We need to start with the
So
big.
if you start with that methodology, you're going to commit yourself to again begging the question, right? So if the question is that you need to know that you have access to the external world, and you start with there's an external world, and I have access to it via revelation, right? That's where you're saying knowledge starts. You're already going to be that's already going to beg the question because you didn't answer the question, right? The question is how you have access to it, and then you're like, or how do you know it's there? How do you know if there's anything out there? That's the thing you're asking of the atheist to do. You're demanding that they start with knowledge of the external world, but then for some reason, in your view, you get to start with the external world. That begs the question. You do see that begs the question, right?
No, we both start with the external world, right? And the question is, what is the nature of the external world, right? Is it one which is revelatory, so that there's a bridge between the big sphere and the small sphere, or is it one where the bridge is burned, right? There is no connection, right, between the external world and the observer. But in
I
both
mean,
of
well,
them, there is, yeah.
anyone who's committed to something like externalism with respect to knowledge or something like that, most of them are going to say something to the effect of like the way in which I know that there's an external world is going to be something about my senses. That even though my senses can be wrong, they're vertical in most cases, and so it's just going to be the case that that's how I have that. It's in virtue of my senses. What I'm asking is what is revelation doing? Because you're demanding an explanation from the atheist that I don't think you're holding your own feet to the fire with. So, like anyone, because I mean, anyone who's going to say something about their senses, sure, that's going to be the base of their epistemology. It's going to be the final stopping point for them as well. It's going to have all those same qualities. And so, what's going to be the distinction between like revelation? How is revelation doing anything special that your senses can't? What's it doing that's special?
So I guess before we go on that, I guess would you accept that the non-God world view is completely incoherent insofar that it can't establish the external world, like anything about the external world to be true or actual?
No, I don't think there's any like entailment to that. No.
So, what properties about the actual state of affairs do you know to be the case beyond a shadow of a doubt?
Well, did you talk asking about certainty? Like I said, I don't think certainty is like a property of knowledge, but the property that I gave you that I'm committed to is a substance monistic system. I don't think that substance dualism can work in virtue of like just the way things are like how things interact. I don't think dualism can work.
So do you know that the substance monistic system is the case? Like this is what is the case in the actual state of affairs.
Yeah, I think I know it. Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, wait,
so
wait, wait, wait.
by
Hold on.
by
I'm not
what?
so sure. Wait, I'm not so sure that like you've
Hey man,
at least for
we're kind of
me.
having a discuss. If we could
No,
just
but
like
you made a claim though that I don't think
if
you
we
can that you haven't
man,
fully explained, and it's gonna give him
dude,
issues,
this
right?
is
Like,
being recorded. If this is being recorded, could you just like could you settle down, simmer down? Let's let me and I finish our conversation. I don't want to have you having like 10 conversations at once if you don't mind. So back to what I was saying. Yes, I do think I know it. No, I don't think that if you mean certainty as like a psychological confidence, yeah, I have that kind of certainty. If you mean like it entails a contradiction or I can't be wrong, like I'm infallible, that's impossible. I don't think that kind of certitude is a good way to measure our knowledge. I think that's just a poor move. And anyone who commits to that, I'll show you that it'll entail epistemic nihilism if you think that that has to be the case.
Um, yeah. I'm not saying that it entails a contradiction. Uh, but what I'm saying is that, yeah, do you know it to be the case? Like have absolute certainty that you can't be wrong. Yeah, you can't be wrong. That substance monergism is what is the case in actual state of affairs. So do you know that you can't be wrong that substance monergism is what is the case in the actual state of affairs?
So no, I deny specifically that Cartesian certainty is a quality of knowledge. And so I do know it, but if the question is with certainty, like that it entails a contradiction, the answer is no. And I think that if you commit yourself to Cartesian certainty being a quality of knowledge, it'll entail epistemic nihilism. And I'll go ahead and walk you through that if you'd like to see how that's going to make you an epistemic nihilist yet again.
So yeah. So basically, my belief, right, or what I hold to, um, is that if you don't know the property set of the actual state of affairs, right, like the big sphere, um, then you cannot make any claims. Right? You can't say anything is the case, because what you would be starting from is axioms, right? So axioms are base level assumptions without an external verification, right? So this is you or I would be like this small sphere, the observer, and you could have this axiom or that axiom. So this assumption. So you could assume substance, monism. Okay, that's an axiom. I just assumed that, and you could walk along and meet someone else, and they could assume something completely different, and maybe they'll assume like I don't know, like dualism or something. So you can just you can go across and meet different atheists, and they can have all these different axioms that aren't the same as yours. But could you say, oh well, my axiom is better than your axiom? Like, not really. It's just okay. I have my assumptions. You have your assumptions. Someone else has their assumptions, and I even need to assume that there are other conscious minds exist. And if I don't assume that, well, it could be the case I'm just talking to myself, or how can I even justify my own consciousness? So
But wait
essentially,
a second. You said you start with the external world, so that's going to be it's going to be peculiar for you to use that. Second off, you're wrong about a couple of things. So most externalists are going to be functioning off of an axiomatic system. They're going to be foundationalists. There are unique foundationalists, like for instance, Michael Huemer is a special case of a foundationalist. Epistemically, that is an internalist, but most externalists are going to be foundationalists. So they're going to be operating off of axioms, and what they say is that those axioms don't stand atop some other epistemic property, but instead they're coming from the external world. So they're going to be an externalist about justification. So you're just factually incorrect. Second off, you're demanding that the atheists do something that you have explicitly said your system refuses to do, which is you're demanding that the atheists start internally and justify the externality. But for you, you get to start externally. You do understand that this is special pleading, right? Like you're saying, I get to do this, but you can't do this. Well, but why do you get to do it? There's nothing unique about your system that's going to allow you to do that, right? So like the atheists can just start with there's an external world, right? Because that's exactly what you're doing. You're starting with there's an external world. What are the property sets of that external world, right? There's no reason the atheist can't say the same exact first premise as you. There's not going to be there's not going to be a reason for that. So when you demand that the atheist starts with their internal position, which I actually lean that uh, well, actually, your view is kind of peculiar because you've said two things that are sort of contradictory. So you've said that in order to have knowledge, you need to know that there is an external world, but the way in which you do that is you start with an external world, right? That very obviously begs the question. Do you agree?
the way that you have knowledge is that you start with the external world. Is what you said.
So there's two things that you said that I think are going to be problematic. The first is that you start with the external world, right? But you said in order to have knowledge, you have to have a way to know that there's an external world. But you start with the external world.
Yeah. So let me also I want to respond what you said to that and the other atheist thing. So I'm not demanding that the atheists start from the observer and reason up to the actual state of affairs. I want us both to start from the external world. I want you to start from the external world, and I want me to start from there, and just to say, okay, well, what is the environment? Like, is the environment a healthy environment for knowledge, so that you can know things that beyond a shadow of a doubt, like know that you know that you know? Or is the environment a very hostile one? So think of it kind of like a zookeeper. Is like he could go and have like bamboo shoots, grass, water, and it's a very nice and healthy environment for panda life. But then maybe there's an exhibit that's just full of spikes. It's like, okay, well, that isn't very healthy or a great environment for the panda life. But you go and you replace that with knowledge. Say, okay, well, is ontology, is the actual state of affairs uh, healthy, right? Is it have a property set in which provides for you or for me to have knowledge, or is the actual state of affairs one such that we could never know anything to be the case, right? So, I think an essential property of that is that the actual state of affairs is a mind, right? Is a mind, and that the actual state of affairs is revelatory. Revelation being the bridge between the big sphere and the observer, right? So I'm just saying, okay, these are necessary aspects to the zoo exhibit, and so then I go to the atheist or non-God worldview and say, okay, well, what is your zoo exhibit, right? What is the property set there, and is it healthy, right? Does it provide for knowledge, right? Does it have this bridge? Does it have these other properties, right? And so I want us both to start from the big sphere. I want us both to start from the actual state of affairs and just kind of like describe it, right? That's kind of where I'm starting from.
Okay, so I'm not clear on how that in any way really like responded. So you're saying you want to say something like that you need a healthy environment in order that people can have knowledge. No, I think I honestly think that God actually has more in common with like with skeptical challenges to knowledge than he does like the ability to reveal knowledge. Um, so like for instance, if we're asking something about as an example, how do I know that this mountain is going to be there tomorrow? Something like that. Well, from my view, there's not something out there that's powerful enough to um, powerful enough to destroy it right now. There's nothing out there that I'm aware of that's going to destroy it. There's nothing that I don't have any reason to believe any of these like that a comet's going to come out of nowhere or that's going to be substantive enough to be able to destroy an entire mountain. Um, and so I'm prima facie justified in believing that the mountain's going to be there tomorrow. Now, from a Christian point of view, if I ask the same thing of a Christian, how do you know that that mountain's going to be there tomorrow? If you say something like, "Well, God revealed it to you," well, you believe God, you know, regulates all aspects of reality. He could snap that mountain out of existence anytime he wants. Boom, poof, it's gone. Right? And he has this capacity. He has this capacity. He has the power, and he's done similar things. He has parted the Red Sea. He has made it rain and kill every human being on the planet from your view. And so you don't really have a good reason to think that you can know the things about tomorrow, as an example. So this is how God kind of he ends up being more skeptical challenge to our knowledge than a way in which we know things. He stands closer um, to like a deceiving, potentially deceiving entity, like particularly when it comes to like the way in which the future will be. Like we don't know that tomorrow the world won't catch fire and everyone die. you know, we don't know that. Why? Well, God could decide, fuck it, I'm done with this world, die, and then bring second coming of Jesus or whatnot. Um, and so we don't know those things. And so it's not clear how it is the case that a world that has such an entity would be better to furnish knowledge if it's the case that this God would have ultimate power over the entirety of the universe. It seems like it would be closer to a skeptical challenge. Like that's the whole point of like Descartes' demon is that it has so much power and it has the motivation to deceive us. Now, maybe you might deny that God doesn't have the motivation. He doesn't have a motivation to deceive us. Um, you would say something like God cannot lie, but I mean, he did a pretty good job of deceiving Abraham into thinking that he was going to kill his son, right? Like, um, he at minimum misled him or didn't tell him the total truth, right? In that moment, like Abraham was convinced that when he got to the top of that mountain, he was going to have to sacrifice his son. That's what he thought was true, and
And
God let him believe that, despite God knowing that he believed that, and it was not true.
and I mean, God's
So
motivation or even
hey man,
wouldn't be relevant to him, right?
hey, it's a recorded discussion. If we could,
Or
sorry, not trying to be rude, but so God at minimum can trick people, like he tricked Abraham, right? Um, and so I don't see how God would be a better system to furnish knowledge than a system where there's not an entity like that, an entity that can just destroy things at its whim, that can rewrite the nature of reality at its beck and call whenever he wants. Why would that system be better than a system where such an entity doesn't exist?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so God dictates like what is possible and impossible, and he has a personality. God is three persons, one God, right? God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, co-equal, co-eternal. God has personality, a being, a nature. All that we are comes from God. Like we are made in the image of God. You know, you can have wrath. Well, God has wrath, and his wrath is that evil. Like you are capable of loving others. Well, God has love, and his love eclipses even the most loving of humans. Right? God is good. He's righteous. Right? So he does things in this orderly, law-like fashion because it is in accord with his nature. So when we look at the mountain and we say, well, you know, it could be the case like God would send a meteor and wipe it out of existence. I mean, yeah, sure, you know, that could be the case. But is that consistent with like what we know about God, like who he is, like what his personality is, like how like our relationship with him?
I
You know,
think the answer to that
that's kind
question
of like
is yes.
good. I
Yeah,
think
yes, it is. It is consistent. At least if the
well,
Bible is true.
yeah. I mean, God does things for reasons. So if you were to send a meteor to wipe out that mountain, there would be a reason behind it. Like, you know, there's a message, there's a point. He's not just random and arbitrary. Like everything, there's reasons. Like there's reasons why he commanded the animal sacrifice. Like the animal sacrifice was to show the Jews that that you need payment for your sins, and this payment comes through the blood, the shedding of the blood of an innocent. Like when God, the Passover lamb, the final plague in Egypt, it was God, there's the angel of death, right? And in order for the Jews firstborn not to be executed by the angel of death, God said, okay, go take a lamb, right? And so okay, take a lamb, male, unblemished, and sacrifice this lamb. Okay, well, why male? Well, it's because Christ is a male. Why unblemished? It's because Christ is sinless. Why a lamb? Because the first coming of Christ, he comes as a lamb, humbly. He's not there to grind the Roman Empire under his heel and establish some earthly kingdom. So they took the blood of the lamb, they put it on their doorposts, and if they're covered with the blood of the lamb, then the angel of death would pass over their house instead of executing the firstborn. This is a picture of positional righteousness of how Christ covers for your sins and my sins, right? God didn't just look at all the Jews, say, okay, these guys go to synagogue more, these guys donate to charity more, these are more righteous, they'll live. Okay, these guys do more sins, they're gonna die. Right? He didn't look at that. He says, sacrifice this lamb. If you're covered by the blood of the lamb, this unblemished lamb, then you're covered. Like your sins are covered. The angel of death passes over. A very vivid picture of how Christ pays for our sins and covers us. So God is not random. Like he doesn't just say stuff to say stuff or tell to do things just to do things. Right? That is part of his character. Now, with regards to you said that having God, the Christian God, would be more of a problem for us being able to know things because you know God can just cause miracles and stuff to happen. So one is my one point is that God has a personality. He's law-like, orderly, and does everything for a good and perfect reason. God is a perfect being, and far more intelligent than me or you. Also caring, right? He cares about you, cares about me. So he has a motivation behind his actions. So all his actions are going to be in alignment with that, with that, with who he is and that. But let's say there is no God, right? So we're going to the non-God worldview. Well, in the non-God worldview, we have an open system, right, in which there's nothing that limits possibility and impossibility. So if you or I were to push a ball off the table and the ball goes off the table and it falls the first time, the second time, the 100th time, the millionth time, there is nothing that strictly enforces that the future will be like the past, right? Like you could push off the ball a millionth at one time, and this time it could just fly into the air and burst into confetti, right? Well, what is that which is primary, ultimate, and fundamental that determines that the future will be like the past? That you know, just because you have had all these experiences of gravity, acting on other objects, that it will always just continue to be that way. So, or the laws of physics or the laws of logic, what instantiates that? But in the Christian worldview, we have God, right? And God would instantiate that the future would be like the past, right?
So the first, you're assuming that there needs to be something that instantiate those. Like I don't know why you wouldn't apply the same thing to God. If everything needs something instantiated, was instantiating God? The answer is God. You haven't instantiated anything. The second thing is that if you're saying, I think this is going to commit you to some weird absurdities. So first off, you're going to say something like, if God is the arbitrator for like all possibility and impossibility, he's the thing that like determines what's possible and impossible. And that's saying that absent God, for instance, the laws of logic, like things could just be contradictory and it wouldn't matter, right? And this is because you're committed that possible. And that's God for a reason. I don't think that you're to the that you have access to God's reasons. And so if you don't have access to God's reasons, it may be the case that God has a reason for snapping the mountain out of existence. You just don't know it. God's performed miracles, and we don't always necessarily, know why those miracles happened until after the fact. Someone, some prophet explained it or something like that. It's not going to be the case that you're going to be like expecting the miracle, or the people who when the flood happened, everyone thought that Noah was insane. They all thought so. It's not like God gave you his reasons before he killed all of them. He gave one person his reasons, but he didn't give everybody his reasons. He just did it. Like he just gave it to one person. That one person built a boat, and then everyone else is laughing, going, "Haha, there's no way there's going to be a huge flood. I mean, haha, that's not going to happen. There's no way. There's no way." And then boom, it happens, and everybody fucking died. And so it's not the case that you have access to God's reasons, and so you're still not going to be able to know tomorrow that mountain's going to be there. And so God still stands closer to like a skeptical challenge to knowledge, not a reason to believe that you have knowledge, even if God has reasons behind what he does, because you don't have access to those reasons. And then I'm trying to think if there was another point in there that was worth responding to. But I still don't see that. I still don't see that there's going to be anything about like if you're rolling a ball off a table, that it's going to be the case that if there's not a God that it can just do anything. I don't see that there's going to be anything that's going to make that the case, right? If anything, if God would be the reason that it would fly off into somewhere, right? God can levitate things, presumably, and maybe he has a reason to levitate that ball. So you can't know that when you roll that ball off the other end of the table, that God's not going to levitate it and it's just going to fly off into space. Right? You can't know that because you don't have access to God's reasons, and maybe he could potentially have reasons to do that. And so it's not going to be the case that God is going to give any more reasons to believe in like the laws of physics, so that they're going to continue being the laws of physics. If anything, God could change the laws of physics. And according to to my view, I don't think that I think that the laws of physics they did change at least once before. Like so, for instance, during the Big Bang, prior to a certain point of the expansion, the laws of physics don't make sense. Inside of a black hole, the laws of physics don't make sense. Those sorts of things where there are places and things where the laws of physics are not continuous. And so, if it is the case, God is instantiating them and bringing them up and making them into these universals, then he's failing miserably at his job, right? He's already doing it wrong, and we're also wrong about a lot of our conceptions about the laws of physics, which is why we don't have a theory of everything yet. But it's not going to be the case that there's going to need to be something that those things need to stand on. Like they're going to be like componential to the fabric of the universe. So I don't see why they would need to stand on some God in order for them to be instantiated. And if it's the case that you're going to demand that something more so fundamental as that needs something to stand on, then why doesn't God need something to stand on too? Like it's just going to be like a straightforward special pleading because God is God. Okay, well, because physics is physics. Like so what? You didn't say anything. But yeah, that's sort of that's my position.
All right, that's fair. So, I guess you brought up like Noah's flood, and you're saying like maybe like the other people were laughing at Noah and thought it was crazy, and they didn't know like God's kind of reasons and such. Well, I would argue that they would know, right? They would know God, and they would know that what they're doing was evil and wicked, worthy of death and judgment, as do we all when we reject God. And in Romans 19 it says, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they're without excuse. Right? So even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations. Right? But basically, so they would have known, right? They would have known God, and they would have known that they're in rebellion against God, and that the rebellion is deserving of.
But that wasn't even the thing that I said
punishment,
they didn't
right?
know. I never
Right.
said they didn't know that they were in rebellion of God or doing bad. I didn't say anything about what I said they didn't know is that a flood was going to happen. And that's the point when I'm talking about the mountain disappearing, about the ball flying off the table. It's not that you don't know that you're not doing something that God wants you to do or any of that. I didn't make any claims about that. What I said was they didn't know the flood. You don't know the mountain wants that this ball fell off the table is intention.
Yeah, so that's fair. Yeah, they didn't know like the flood would occur. I mean, sure, that's fair, and I mean, yeah, I'll accept what you said that like if we're pushing the ball off the table, it could be the case God could make it do some sort of like levitate or person confetti and such. Uh, but God being perfect, like and orderly and law like, uh, there would have to be a reason as for why he would be doing these things. Um, and so far, uh, as we have been existing in God's universe, we see that things operate in a very law like fashion. But I guess there's a couple. I'm just kind of thinking about this. Um, so yeah. So basically, in the non-God worldview, there would be nothing that instantiates, possibility and possibility, or that the future would be like the past. And then the other thing, I mean, the theme of this objections, it goes along to like, okay, how do you know that you can like trust God to be dependable, right? It's like let's say you or I would say, okay, let's like your mother or my mother, like, okay, well, how can you trust her to like feed you food that isn't poisoned? And it's like, okay, like it could be the case that she has poisoned my food today, and I won't live to see another sunrise. But I would not hold that to be the case, right? I would not believe that to be the case based on my relationship with her, and similarly with you, right? Do you like decide, oh, I'm gonna take the food and run it through like a poison test, or feed it to my dog and see if he drops dead before I take a bite? Uh, no, we don't take these sorts of actions. So, in a similar sense, you and I have a relationship with God who is very orderly, law-like, trustworthy, and dependable. So that we can expect the universe to operate in this orderly, law-like, dependable way. Right? It's because of this, because we have a relationship with Him and know who He is. So that's kind of how I view that. Um,
Well, I
yeah,
mean, the
I
thing
guess
is
that's
that
fine.
this is going to stand in massive contrast to like anything biblical, right? So like this is just going to straightforwardly be against like the views of the Bible, right? So like God has not always been so dependable. He killed a whole hell of a lot of people that believed in him that according to you knew they were doing bad things against God. He still killed them. He said it just the fact that he loves us isn't enough for him to not feed us that poison analogously, as you would say. Um, Second off, God has done things like destroying the world. God has done those equivalents. And thirdly, when you're talking about like instantiating, if you're saying that like the law, like the laws of logic need something else to stand upon them, then you don't think that they're necessary, right? Which is going to commit you to saying something like contradictions can happen if God just decides to let them. Um, and that's a really weird. That's one a really weird thing to say because then you're going to be making the laws of logic dependent on something. And I don't think that they can be dependent. I don't think that they can happen if you even if you take like a realist view of them. I don't think they can be like. There's not a way in which they can be dependent. Now things like the laws of physics, I think are um, adequate uh, to be trustworthy. Like they largely don't change, and they change. They also do the same thing that you're positing God does. They change for a reason. Like for instance, in the center of a black hole, they change because space time is bent infinitely, right? So that there's going to be a reason, an explanation as to why the laws of physics alter or change. There's going to be an explanation for each one of these things. So that has the same exact quality that you're saying allows God to be that allows God to be a good environment for knowledge. But the problem is that, like I said, God stands closer to a skeptical challenge because his reasons we don't really have access to or at all. We do kind of have a general understanding of the world in a much better way than we would of like a God, right? Like God could just he essentially he has magic. He can magic whatever he wants, and even if you posit he has reasons to do them, that doesn't mean you always have access to those reasons. And if we don't have access to those reasons, then we don't have knowledge that things are going to be continuing. And if that's the case, like, or that they're going to continue being the way they were in the past, like, um, and if the part of the reason you believe in God is because God gives you reason to believe the future will be like the past, then it's not the case that God offers that to you, right? If this whole argument goes, it's just not the case that God offers that, and so it's not a good reason to believe in God, and that doesn't make God a better option for having knowledge. Um, I think I'm going to leave the conversation here. I'll let you have the last word if you want. I think we had quite a long chat, and maybe some of these other guys and gals want to get in. And I don't know if there's any girls in the room. Actually, I haven't looked, but it was maybe these other guys want to have a chat too, and maybe they would interact with you or me or whatever. And so I'll let you have the last word, and then we'll just kind of open things up. And I don't know if Marco wants to post this recording or not. I think he said he was going to post it, but we'll see. Cool. And I also really appreciate that Ask a Christian was you're very respectful. You didn't interrupt. We didn't overtalk each other very much. I know I've interjected a few times than you did, but for the most part, you were just so respectful. So I super appreciate that, man.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, sounds good.
But if you want, you can have the
yeah.
last word, and then we'll open things up.
Sure. I guess yeah. So some of my thoughts is like these are a lot of good questions. And good to check into like John Frame, Greg Bonson, Van Til. They got videos on YouTube. John Frame has a lecture series. Good to check that stuff out.